what can we do, the countries can do to strengthen political commitment? How can this be effectively implemented in regions on enhanced power practices? Then the first questions about the law and policies. The second questions we ask about the political will. We have seen in Bangladesh that currently the interim government has formed the different reform commissions. And people are a bit optimistic saying that now there is a potential to have a proper reforms. Now the question is there any kind of things that we can pursue that even if the political government come in, that kind of reforms can be sustained. So what kind of the mechanism that we can do to make our reforms sustainable? The third point I want to highlight and ask our panelists is the technology. And we know that there is ample of evidence that technology helps to improve the transparency and accountability. But it also reduces the corruptions, it improves the service delivery. But also the technology has some sort of the weakness, like if the technology can be misused, and if the technology misused, then the people can be suffer. So from that perspective, is there anything that we can learn from the regions or across this globe, that how the technology was used, but also the technology, when the government put the technology, what kind of safeguarding for the people that the technology cannot be misused? So with that three questions, I would first request Professor Mushtaq Khan probably will give a framework that what can be done and what we should not do. So Professor Mushtaq Khan, you have 7 to 8 minutes and feel free to what you imagine.
Fighting corruption and reducing corruption is one of the most difficult things in developing countries because it goes against lots of established practices of doing business. And these established practices of doing business, people say are somewhat, in some cases could be cultural, that we prefer to act informally rather than following the rules. We find informal solutions to things. But I think there is a deeper problem. And the deeper problem is the distribution of power and capabilities in developing societies. And when we say that we haven't put enough political will behind anti-corruption, or the laws of anti-corruption aren't good enough, I don't agree with that. I think that the issue is that the anti-corruption laws, including in Bangladesh, are quite good. It's the implementation that is missing. Now, if the implementation is missing, the question is, why is implementation missing? Is it because of political will? And I think that is the wrong way of framing the question. The political leaders, certainly in Bangladesh in the recent past, had a lot of political will. They had the political will to kill thousands of people on the streets. They had the political will to lock up thousands of people in prison. They had the political will to disappear thousands of people. So what was the missing political will? Is that they didn't want to do certain things. So what was missing was the interest. They had no interest in fighting corruption because they were engaging in corruption on a mega scale themselves. So I think what we saw in the last few years in Bangladesh was an extreme case, but that is the case across developing countries, that the ruling, the powerful, whether business powerful or politics powerful or the bureaucrats who are powerful, they do not have an interest in reducing corruption. This is a starting point, changing those structure of interests of the powerful who are breaking these laws. And I think there are basically two different types of problems. One type of problem is very easy to fix. And the other type of problem is very difficult to fix, but we might find fixes as we go along. The easy to fix problem, or the relatively easier to fix problem, is that because no one follows the rules, no one actually takes any interest in the rules because they know we are not going to follow the rules. So we have a lot of bad laws. We have a lot of poor regulations. So if you look at the tax schedule, there are contradictory tax rules. If I do this, I'm breaking that law. If I'm doing that, I break this law. You have rules which people cannot follow because the rules are totally dysfunctional with reality. To give you some example of our own research in Bangladesh, junior doctors have to spend 2 years in Upazila Health Complex after they graduate. Many of these Upazila Health Complex have no facilities. If you're a female doctor, you feel unsafe. There is no school. So a lot of doctors who actually want to go to Upazila Health Complex cannot go because the law is unimplementable. So you are actually encouraging people to break the rules. Now, those things where the rule itself doesn't make sense, that a reasonable person could not follow those rules, we need to change those rules so that reasonable people could start following those rules. I think this is the very difficult, but this is the easier part. The more difficult part is that you have a lot of rules that people could follow, but they don't want to follow because they benefit by not following it. So they deliberately violate it. Okay, so most of the corruption problems we have, which are very serious, are like that. So I'm taking a loan from a bank. The rules say I should repay it, or I should go bankrupt, or I should be declared a defaulter. The rules are not applied. I'm getting more loans. I don't repay it. The bank does not declare me a defaulter. I take more loans. Now, this is not because the rules aren't absent. It's not because I could not borrow this money and do a real business and repay it. It's because I don't want to. In other words, my interest is to break the rules. The bank's interest is to let me break the rules. And the politician's interest is to ignore it and take their own cut from this whole process. So you have this collusion. Now, these are the really difficult parts of corruption, where different powerful actors are colluding deliberately to break the rules, and just passing another rule that you shouldn't break these rules isn't going to help it. When you have powerful interests deliberately breaking the rules, you cannot solve this problem by passing more rules, because they will break those rules, and you will pass more rules, and then they will break those rules. The only way you can break this is by coming up with an alternative configuration of power and interests which will challenge them when they are breaking these rules. Okay? Now, so my approach to anti-corruption is that you only reduce corruption when you can find an alternative coalition who have the power and the interest to stop this corruption. Now, this is very difficult. And what your options are depends on the political context. So in the political context before the 5th of August, you could not challenge the breaking of rules by the top politicians and the top bureaucrats and the top businessmen at all. If you tried to do that, you would disappear. You would be picked up and you would disappear. So in that context, what we were doing was focusing on corruption lower down the chain and trying to find solutions to those, and even that was blocked by the regime. Now we have a situation where you can target the corruption at the highest level, right? So there is an opportunity for maybe a year or two, or however long, we don't know, where the highest level corruption might be challenged, because now the power and the interest is to take that on. But this might not last forever. As soon as you have elections and an electorate process, you will have 300 constituencies. MPs will be looking for money to fight their elections. Who will give them the money? The business people who have made the money in the past. And so that money will come back into some kind of positions of power. And again, you will be very constrained in terms of finding coalitions who can check the political intervention in rule breaking. Okay? So there is a short-term opportunity, but there is a long-term problem we have to address. And the long-term problem is, I think, an incremental approach. And the way to fight that, we don't have time here to go into this, but I have written a lot on it and we are working on this research in Bangladesh now. The longer-term solution is to use policies to enhance checks and balances in the economy and in politics. So, for example, if you want to break down the power of oligarchs in getting bank loans, it is not simply a regulatory process.
You have to increase the number of businesses in Bangladesh who access bank loans. In other words, you have to change the distribution of power gradually through policies so that you have thousands of SME type businesses who are accessing bank loans, and the bank loans aren't going to the top 5 businesses. The more competition there is, the more likely it is that if one person is defaulting, other businesses will put pressure on the bank to correct this. But if the bank is controlled by 2 people or 1 person, whatever regulation you pass, you will not be able to create those checks. So the longer term solution is to create a more competitive economy, have more businesses, have more political parties, have more competition in politics, in business. This is essential precondition. Only then can we go and say, how can we improve the bureaucracy? And the bureaucracy also needs to be improved. But public service cannot operate in isolation from what the politicians and the businessmen are saying. The bureaucrat cannot stand up and not give the permission or force, if you're a Bangladesh bank bureaucrat, you cannot force bank regulations when the politicians and the businesses are saying, no, we will not do it. You will try it, but you will be out of your job in 5 minutes. So I think that these 3 things have to go together. Making the economy more competitive, making politics more competitive, and then reforms of the bureaucracy. And the one thing that, very briefly, because we don't have a lot of time, I think what everyone, globally recognize that to have a well-working bureaucracy, which is going to be resistant to corruption, is not enough to simply have merit-based appointments or technology or give them digitalization and so on. You need to create pride in being a bureaucrat. You need to create an esprit de corps that I am proud to serve the country. How do you create this pride? I think that all successful bureaucracies have a history of engagement of politicians with bureaucrats, and you have to create a bureaucracy that is proud to serve the country. If the bureaucracy doesn't have this pride, and I think if you go around the kind of different departments of Bangladesh or in most developing countries, bureaucrats have lost that pride. They used to have that pride in the 1960s. People competed to get into the bureaucracy because being a bureaucrat meant you had a lot of social status and you were doing something for the country. Now, the only social status you get from being in the bureaucracy is if you are making a lot of corrupt money. So I am in the bureaucracy, I make a lot of money, then I have social status. But if I'm in the bureaucracy and I don't make money, I have no social status. So unless we can change this cultural perception, public perception, and within the bureaucracy, this is a long-term thing. It's not a policy decision that I'm going to make the bureaucracy proud. It's something that has to come up through our education system, through the recruitment system, through public discourse. So all of these things need to come together. Competitive economy, competitive politics, many sources of power, not a few. If you have a few sources of power, no amount of regulation, no amount of writing laws is going to help you. No new constitution will help us. We have to change the distribution of power. We have to break the oligarchs. We have to break the big, family-based political control of politics. As you have more political actors and economic actors, the same regulation that we have will start becoming effective because these people will start putting pressure. Why aren't you taking this money back from this borrower? Why are you giving this businessman permission but not me? The businesses have to put pressure. Politics has to put pressure. Then the regulations will start biting, and then you have a bureaucracy which has pride in its own mission. Things start coming together. It's a long task. But the immediate task in Bangladesh, and now I'm speaking as a Bangladeshi, immediate task in Bangladesh, we have a political moment where the power of the big oligarchs and the big politicians has been smashed. Now is an opportunity to go after the big oligarchs and recover some of this money and recover some of the stolen assets. If we can do that, we will start improving that distribution of power, which will allow the second stage reforms to happen. So this is the framing. I think we have a lot of other insights, and then we can have discussions with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Khan. You outlined the incremental approach, and I think there is very nice way of managing these corruptions is horizontal and vertical check and balance. Because if this horizontal and vertical check and balance does not work, the law or policy cannot solve this problem. So we have to work with society, we have to work with people, but also we have to work in the different multi-pronged strategy. So let's start with probably Anurag Acharya, and then he will share his thought and reflections from Nepal. Anurag, if you probably reflect on so people perspective because you work on it, that would be great along with what Professor Khan said. Oh, thank you.
Thank you to organizers for helping us come all the way from our respective countries from Nepal to put across our perspective in this very important topic of illicit money flow and corruption. Let me begin by arguing, and Professor Mustak has already given a framework of the topic, and it's always easier to talk after he talks because then he has given some sort of theoretical framework to the issue. And I've had the privilege of working very closely with him over the last few years to understand the theoretical underpinnings of this problem of corruption in South Asian society. My initial argument would be that South Asian societies, as a whole, the problem of corruption is inherent in our society, which is also one of the colonial legacy that we've inherited from this region. And my fellow panelist from Pakistan will also highlight later that we've had an unenviable history of weak governance leading to very poor service delivery and spillage of scarce public resources. As it is, the pie is so small, the economic pie is so small, and most of the government spending, when it goes into waste in the form of misallocations and in misappropriations, then it becomes very difficult for society to grow as a whole. And this is mostly due to kind of nexus between the political class, bureaucracy, and businesses that Professor Mustak was also highlighting a while ago. And this is where the question of an institution that you had raised, how are our institutions performing, and what is its implication on our governance and service delivery. So ideally, this is nothing new, and this kind of nexus exists even in best of the developed societies, except in functioning societies and democracies. These kind of spillage don't matter in the long run because the source of resource pie is so big that limited spillage is not going to impact you in such a big way. And that it does, and they also have some form of functional checks, that kind of keeps checks on over spillage of resources, and there are some checks in the forms of transparency measures as well and accountability measures as well. But if you talk about Nepal, after a decade-long conflict and almost another decade of political transition and yet another decade of political practice of the new system of federalism that we have in place, I'm very sad to say that things are not working quite well, as per the promises that the new constitution had given, that the devolution of power is going to bring government closer to people, and then by that regard there will be more accountability measures. Let me give you a few examples. What happened with the devolution of power in Nepal is, a lot of the resources that the government had allocated went to the local government, in the form of local government spending. But because the local government now have limited oversight, because the provincial governments are weak and the federal governments do not directly oversight local governments, they have lot of resources at their disposal, and they are not able to spend that money in a way that is very effective. So the spillage, there is a lot of spillage because they don't know how to spend that money, and also there is a lot of corruption because a lot of the local development contracts are now going to local businesses who have direct stake in the politics. And there are a lot of contractors who have started running for local government posts, mayoral posts, deputy mayoral posts, even at the ward level. So essentially, all the spillages, the corruption money that is being accumulated is being fed back into politics. So that interest that we were versus the political will that you were asking about, it's not question of political will that we were discussing earlier. It's actually the interest that is driving the political behavior of the political class, not just at the federal level, at the local level. So essentially, we've had the federalization of corruption in Nepal, and I'm sure that's the case in other countries too. And now coming to the question of youth, of course, corruption, mismanagement, making big headlines these days due to access to social media, it frustrates the youth more, because they are the ones who don't see their future in a country which is, so enmeshed in corruption. So, that is the reason why there is so much of, out migration from our region, especially from Nepal as well. A lot of, youths leaving the country in large numbers. And it is one of the concerning thing, because it also contributes to lack of experienced and skillful resources to take the country into the next generation. So corruption is not just about spillage of resources. It is also about denying the country its a rightful future. Denying the country of the future in terms of skilled manpower, in terms of knowledge. So, it has impacted this region and this country in multiple ways. And talking about the, social media and other technological tools for, accountability and transparency, we've had some success in terms of, limited success in terms of e-governance that is being practiced. But again, technology is only as good as how you use it. If the same bureaucracy, if the same institution that is leading this process is undermining the impact of e-governance, then it does not make any sense. For instance, our passport system, our licensing system is all electronic based. It's all online based. But if you try to access it, it's the same, bureaucracy that has made sure that these things, these technologies don't work, and they frustrate. And then inevitably, you have to go to the middlemen, you have to go to the brokers who then, engage in kickbacks, So technology has not worked to our interest of the common people, to say the least. But it's a start, but it's a ball rolling, and it will gather its pace. But for now, we are in a situation where it has not completely worked, and that is where I think Professor Mustaq will, bring in his insight into, how we can inevitably, make the system that is still broken work by, focusing more on interest. Technology is also of essence, but focusing on interest and how it actually incentivizes the same broken system to function, at least in the interim period when, the robustness of the institution takes over.
Thank you, Anurag. I think you highlight the high monopoly and discretionary, and then the lack of accountability, how it affects these three, increasing these corruptions. That's a very nice of framing these things. But also you mentioned about the youth frustrations. And I want to reflect some discussions with the youth, Bangladeshi youth. I also ask these questions about the youth, and they are highly frustrated about the level of the corruptions in the different service delivery, not only in the recruitment, but also, in everyday their lives. And some of them told me that, look, I want to move this country. And then I said, why is that? He said that I don't want to be corrupted. Or my generations, I do not want to see my kids will be corrupted. So in that kind of I would say reflections, I think we all need to reflect on this, and I think this is an opportunity for Bangladesh to look and then see what we can do. Really think about the youth perspective. And the previous experience, the revolution that we have seen, I think is a testament that I think youth really cares about their country. They are not only just want to live because they are forced to live, but they really want to stay, and then they care about their country. With that, let's hear from Pakistan experience, and I would invite Faiz Yasin Vidal. He will reflect on some of the work that I think he is doing, but also to look into the overall, the macro perspective, what is working and what is not working. So Faiz, you have 7 to 10 minutes, please.
Thank you, colleagues, and it's a privilege to share the stage with Professor Mushtaq. Such a towering figure in the field of anti-corruption, governance, and accountability. I would try my best to not to repeat what my distinguished friends have said, and would like to begin with what Dr. Mushtaq has said. In fragile contexts, and in a way, political fragility does exist in Bangladesh. It's an opportunity for the dictatorial tendencies, people with dictatorial tendencies to sort of take over. And when they do take over, probably one of the first things that they talk about is getting rid of corruption. That allows them to sort of gain the legitimacy which is required to rule a country for a relatively longer period of time. It has similar episodes have played out in Pakistan, and in one of those episodes, the then military dictator, he created an organization which still exists, doing good work in pockets, of course, not with an overarching mandate. But right at the founding of that organization, National Accountability Bureau, they conducted a study. They really wanted to study the fabric of corruption, the profile and portfolio of corruption in the country, and the findings of that study were very interesting, and that's where I would like to connect with what my colleagues have said and what I would like to lay out in this discussion. They said that the data said that about 80% of the corruption in country is done by 20% of the people. That famous 80-20 rule. 80% of the corruption is done by 20% of the people, and these 20% of the people are the senior bureaucracy, people with fancy titles, secretaries, commissioners, and with a lot of influence and power. And 20% of the corruption, the total volume, is done by 80% of the public officials. And they categorized these 20% of corruption conducted by 80% of the people as need-based corruption. This was the corruption which was being done to sort of people were making money on the sidelines, probably to put their kids into the private schools, probably to have their parents treated at private hospitals, probably to buy a car, sort of to ease out their transportational needs, probably to build a house, those kind of things. And the 20% of people doing 80% of the corruption were the people who were stealing money and taking it out of the country, sort of to buy properties in Dubai and London and overseas areas. And they realized that you cannot honk everyone with one stick. Needs need to be met. The need-based corruption, you can only eliminate it by meting out the needs of those people. And then at the same time, the greed-based corruption, you need to create stringent anti-corruption mechanisms to deal with that. Just one example of greed-based corruption. 1/3 of Dubai, all the properties in Dubai, they are owned by Pakistanis. A recent study has revealed that 1/3 of all the properties in Dubai, it's owned by Pakistanis. And if you look at the profile of these Pakistanis, these are not rich and influential business tycoons and businessmen and those kind of people. Most of them, they are public officials. And when you look at the pricing of those properties and match it with their salaries, there is no match, which obviously means that they are stealing money. In every country, when we have to fight corruption, we have to look at, because corruption is also, it's a macro phenomena. It persists, it exists everywhere. But also, the solution to this challenge, they are almost always localized. And the way to look at them is to look at the islands of transparency within each country. That gives you an insight into how to deal with the corruption in your local context. And the example which I have is that of motorway police in Pakistan. A department which is highly cherished for their professionalism, for their integrity, for their public service. They are so good, that the thing is that just like in Dhaka, traffic in Pakistan, everyone have their own rules. Once people are on the road, they would like to sort of drive by their own rules. There are no universal rules that would guide them. But the moment they would step onto motorway, they would wear their seatbelt, they would follow the speed limits, and they would follow all the rules and regulations. Why? Because it's next to impossible to bribe the people who are on the motorway police. Now one would wonder that probably the motorway police department went on to additional lengths to sort of select and headhunt and recruit these people. It so happened that I was with this Inspector General of Police, the guy who had built this department, the Motorway Police Authority, and I asked him, sir, you did a wonderful job. How did you do that? He said, it's funny because I was in charge of, right in the beginning, I was in charge of both the Punjab Police and the Motorway Authority Police, and I was under tremendous pressure by the Prime Minister, for whom this was a sort of, a big ticket project. He had built the motorway and now they wanted to deploy police on that to regulate traffic. And he told me to sort of, that I need about 200 people and I need them immediately. And the Punjab police was already understaffed. It was very difficult to sort of, pull out good people and provide to them. And out of frustration, I told my colleagues that select 150 to 200 crooks from the police, because I have been put under so much pressure, take out all the goons. This is our opportunity to sort of, clean up our department and sort of, give out to them. But what happens is that motorway police follows a different service structure. Their salaries are probably 3 times the normal police department. They are very well respected, and part of that respect is gained by these people themselves. They have all the required tools and equipments and gadgets and technology, and they are well supervised and sort of well facilitated. What happens is that the moment these crooks, these corrupt people, they are moved from one department to the other, they change the face of this entire service. It's 180-degree change. And they realize that because part of the reason is that the monitoring mechanisms are more stringent. Part of the reasons is that integrity is being driven from their inner self, because now they are well paid, because now they do not have to steal money to meet out the needs back at home, because they have the enough money to sort of do those kind of things. And that's where you begin fighting corruption in the country. Part of the reason why why bureaucracy and politicians themselves they get into corruption is that there's an environment of uncertainty in the country. Imagine yourself, put yourself into the shoe of a public official. If uncertainty looms large on your future, once you retire, whether you still be able to afford education for your kids, whether you still be able to afford healthcare for yourself and your family members, whether you still be able to live a life with dignity without asking financial help from anyone, as long, the larger is the volume of that uncertainty, the larger and the bigger is the tendency to get into corruption and make and steal money, sort of, to secure your future. And it's sort of, cyclical. When there is uncertainty, people steal money. When people steal money, the uncertainty gets to increase, and sort of, that's how the entire thing goes on. And that's where, what Professor Mushtaq has said, it's very important to restore the pride in the bureaucrats. Something which we at Accountability Lab do is we run this campaign which is called Integrity Icon Pakistan, where sort of, we seek nominations from the people to nominate public officials which they have interacted with and which they think are sort of, different from the rest of the lot. People who are amenable, who, when you reach out to them, they really want to interact with you. They want to, they would go out of their way to facilitate you, to assist you to provide you with desired information and desired services. And that moment has sort of, allowed us to break the barriers, the accessibility barriers between the senior bureaucrats or, everyday bureaucrats and the people, and sort of, restore the trust between the bureaucracy and the common people. Now, it's a tiny campaign, and we have only been running it for last 7 or 8 years, and we have only been able to, the design of the project is that we select 5 people everywhere. But when we started doing this campaign, the broader perception was that finding an honest public officials in Pakistan, it's like, what are you talking about? It's not even possible. But after doing it for 7 or 8 years, I can tell you that there are so many, honest people. And there are eye-opening stories when they come to you. We call them integrity stories. In order to qualify, people need to share with you the instances where they were offered probably unprecedented amount of monies and they did not sort of, agree to receive them, or they were threatened to do something and they sort of, ignored those threats and still did the job what they were meant to do. We have identified people who, the very first icon in Pakistan, he was transferred 13 times in 1 year of his service. He had to homeschool his kid just because they would enroll him into a school, and then his dad was transferred, and they had to move on. 13 times transferred in 1 year. We identified a deputy commissioner, whose entire family was threatened to be murdered in Karachi. People who are aware of situation in Karachi, for a very long period of time, it has been ruled by goons and, all kind of criminals. And when you receive these calls that we know in which college your daughter studies, we know the route on which your kids go to school, we know where your wife works, we know the route that you use for your travel. You need to remove yourself from this project, otherwise, you are gone. But you still ignore these threats and you continue to do the job. These are the integrity stories. And these are people who are not working for additional incentives, These are the people who are just committed to do their job. I think part of the, one way of sort of, creating that culture that restores pride in bureaucracy is to sort of, begin celebrating the work which these people are doing and rally public support behind them. There is this famous saying, it says that it takes a village to raise a child. It also takes a village or probably multiple villages and towns to create the ecosystem that helps restore the pride in bureaucracy. And I think the more people are getting into the discussions around anti-corruption and governance and transparency, the more we are creating that ecosystem that can restore pride in the common people. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Faiz. I think you mentioned about the integrity icon that you referred. I think that's a very nice way of putting things that, that is a very human nature, that people wants to always think about the interest and incentives, right? And if you think about the corruptions, it's all about this kind of interest and incentives dynamics. And people wants to be recognized for their own good work. And if the state or society cannot give that kind of the reward or some sort of the recognitions, then it's also very difficult, to play their kind of the active role. And then people sometimes frustrated because for their honest life, sometimes they are humiliated by the society or the people or their family. So I think we all need to think about that, addressing corruptions or reducing corruptions. I think it's a matter of the two things. One, the Professor Mustak said about the distribution of the power, but also thinking about the interests and incentives. Why the people will be follow the honest life or the kind of the integrity they will ensure, and what kind of the incentives that the state or society can offer for their work. That's, I think, we need to think about it. So with that in note, I think we have 15 minutes left. And we want to take probably the two questions first round. And I request participant, if you introduce yourself when you ask your questions and be specific to whom your questions is, or your questions can be for all the panelists, then please mention that. That would be great. And please limit your questions in 2 minutes, please.
Thank you. I am Shamim Sharif, I'm a student of Dhaka University. My question is that I see my previous experience that the public service officials will be involved a lot of corruption. So, but in their student time, in their student period, they have a lot of struggle to success, to gain something. But at a certain stage, he or she will deviated his principles and involved in a corruption. What's your opinion? But at a certain stage, he or she be deviated their principles. But in a student period, he or she be struggling for success or passing the hardest life. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very good and specific questions. The back.
I am MD Mamun Mia. I am from Dinajpur, Haji Mohammedan Science and Technology University. I have two questions. At the first, Mr. Khan sir, bureaucracy destroys already. But my question is, who is responsible to destroy the bureaucracy, authority or populations? And my additional question is, the people who is involved with the corruptions, we can see, look that most of the people are rich. On the one words, they are capitalist. The world belongs to capitalist. Among this scenario, how does we reduce the corruptions in the world?
Today, the money trail, broken promise, fighting corruption. Now, the question, the first word, money. There is the blood of the society or civilization. So, everybody is trying to take out some blood, whatever they can do it. But what happens at one time, some of the people does it, and after a certain time, those who have not done it, they think, hey, we are foolish. Let's start also doing it. And that's why the thing has gone from top down to the bottom, where we can say that this is equal distribution of money, but it is not as per the system. So now in Bangladesh, it is. I will accept this thing that it is now in that way. It is from top to bottom. We have an organization called ACC, Anti-Corruption Commission. They are sitting like a shopkeeper. Somebody will come and give them the complaint, then only he works or he reacts. Like a police station, somebody tried to kill me or somebody has robbed. But ACC should not be like this. It is all proactive. And they will be telling the government, you change this rule, or do it like this. So ACC seems to be sort of an only activate once somebody is coming and telling him. But he knows everything what is happening. He's in the society, he sees the press, and he sees the news on the television and all, and on the internet, but he doesn't work. So simply, it is the intent of the government whether they want to do it or not, or the government servants, they want to do it or not. They will, even if you give them a big salary, big facilities and all these things, need is endless of this human being. So that's why I think from the heaven we have been sent to the earth. Otherwise, we should have been in the heaven. Thank you very much.
Thank you. 3 questions. I would probably first start with Anurag.
Yeah, I think the second question was very interesting as to who corrupts the bureaucracy. Is it the politicians or the people? I think it's a little bit of both, but I'll focus on politicians and political parties because then that brings in the question of money, that I was just highlighting. Then it's how our electoral system functions. These days, without a certain amount of money, it's impossible to fight elections. And forget about fighting elections. It's impossible to win candidacy to contest elections. I was looking at some data from Nepal. Election Commission in Nepal prescribes that a candidate running for MP's post cannot spend over $26,000 per elections. For provincial elections, it's less than $20,000. And for local mayoral elections, it's less than $6,000. But according to data, if you look at the election spending for average MPs who are contesting Nepali elections starts from around $100,000 and could go well over $500,000 or even in $1 million in some cases. One senior politician in Nepal has gone on record to state that he spent around $450,000 to contest his elections. So you can see if that amount of money is being pumped into elections, where does that money come? You cannot be a politician and earn that much of money. You either have to take it from businesses or you have to engage in some kind of kickbacks, accumulate. So 4 years you spend in government office, you accumulate all that money for contesting next elections, or you have a businessman or business tycoon whose interest you serve while in office, so that then that businesses serve your electoral interests. So it's a very well-oiled system. So you say it's our electoral system that needs fixing, and probably that is one good place to start, at least for Nepal, I can say.
Fires?
Someone said destroying bureaucracy. I think we tend to get very aggressive in the face of the volume of corruption that we see in our day-to-day lives. But the thing is that the opposite to bureaucracy is ad hocism, and no country runs on ad hocism. You need to have rules and regulation and a bureaucratic structure to sort of, oversee the implementation of those rules. Now, when we say rules, how many rules? And what rules? I give you an example from Pakistan. The the federal government in Pakistan, it has 8,000 plus rules and regulation. 8,000 plus. The provincial governments, the provinces in Pakistan, they have additional 4,000 rules, and laws on top of the 8,000 laws which have been created by the federal government. 12,000 laws to run a country. I think we are over-regulated, I would say. The implementation is not there. Also, about 60% of these laws and rules, they are the colonial legacy. The Pakistani people did not want them to be there at the first place. The colonial government created them. And just because the interest of the Pakistani legislator was not there in amending them, or probably they were the beneficiary of those laws at the first place, they did not change them. So I think when the ownership of the people is admitted, you begin by changing those laws, which hinder people, which are there to suppress the people, not to facilitate the businesses, but to sort of extort money out of them in an unfair manner. There are so many equations which discuss corruption, and one of those equations is about there is this famous economist who says that corruption is the cost of efficiency in an inefficient economic system. What is it that is making that inefficient economic system? It's the rules and laws which govern that business system, that business ecosystem. As Professor Mushtaq has said, you begin by fixing those laws. And something which most of us have missed out on is that the use of technology. I mean, we are very wary when we talk about technology. We believe that people are not there yet to adopt technology in a full manner. The base principle is that, begin by trafficking. You can always, or pretty much almost always, bribe a traffic sergeant. You can never bribe a traffic camera, for example. So one way of taking away power from bureaucracy for the misuse of, their liberty to misuse power is take it away by introducing technology, reduce the human interaction. If people don't have to interact with humans, if people have to interact with machines, not tempered machine. The tampering in technology is another thing which, I know the friends who are expert in the field know better about. But technology, technology is a great equalizer. It helps you deal with the rules, government-created rules, in a much more fairer manner. That's what I have to say. So.
There was one question about, a student who is very committed, joins the bureaucracy and suddenly becomes corrupt. I think this is a very common phenomenon. And I think the answer is not to look at the individual, but look at the system. So within this corrupt system, there are a few individuals who haven't been corrupted. As Fayaz was saying, we should celebrate them. But we should also look at what makes people corrupt. And the answer is, as we know, corruption is not an individual thing. Corruption is a group or collective syndicated corruption. So if you're in a bureaucracy and you are lower down the chain, and you are not doing your corruption, you are stopping the flow of money up the chain, and they will remove you. This is why the honest person, as Fayaz said, might have 13 transfers in 1 year. Why? Because they are stopping the flow of money. And as soon as you stop the flow of money, you will be transferred. Now, I think we have to, therefore, find solutions which are not just at the individual level, but at the system level. If you cannot solve the system where the checks and balances are there, from competing businesses, competing political parties, who are putting pressure on the bureaucracy not to be, and breaking up the syndicates and collusion within the bureaucracy, just relying on individual morality will not succeed. Because there are not that many people who are so moral that they will suffer 13 transfers a year and no promotions just for the sake of being non-corrupt. There are very few such people. There are a few, but there are very few such people. Second point that wasn't covered is someone asked the question of capitalism. And I think that you have to understand there are many types of capitalism. If you have a crony capitalism with 2 or 3 big businesses, you will have a huge amount of unfairness and capture, and they will destroy the country. If you have a more competitive capitalism with 10,000 capitalists competing, you will create more jobs and you will have lesser corruption. But it is still an unfair system. I accept that. Capitalism is a structurally unfair system. But I think that you can have a conversation about post-capitalist societies, but first of all, let's at least make capitalism work well before you talk about post-capitalism. So and I think there was a question about the Anti-Corruption Commission, which I'll briefly talk about. as you may know or you may not know, I'm in the Commission for Reforming the Anti-Corruption Commission, and it's a very difficult task. And the very difficult task is that the reality of it is that we are now in a very untypical situation. This untypical situation is that our, if you like, political leadership is not elected. Okay? So they can take a very strong position against corruption. Because the Anti-Corruption Commission, even if they are trying to, they will not find any corruption against Mr. Yunus. By the way, Mr. Yunus was charged with corruption by the previous anti-corruption, but it's not a real charge. But as soon as you have an election, and you have 300 MPs sitting in parliament, and a prime minister and a home minister, these people, as Anurag was saying, inevitably, by the very structure of the problem, they will have spent a lot of money in the election. Forget about anything else. Now, this election money, where is it coming from? So if you really have a very independent anti-corruption commission, they will be able to stop the government on day one. And this is why every elected government in every developing country gets rid of the power of the anti-corruption commission to act independently. They can only act with the authority of the government, which means that the only thing they do is they chase the opposition. So when an opposition case comes, they approve it. Okay, you can go. But if a government case comes, they will block it. So we have this thing called the Jachai Bachai Committee, JABAC. That is a kind of selection. They stop most of the cases there, anything sensitive. Then finally goes to the commissioner and the chairman, and they will stop anything that is sensitive. Okay, so how do you address that? We are discussing it, and it's not easy. You can, if you give too much power to the chairman and the commissioners, they will be able to stop the next government on day one, and therefore the next government will tear up this ordinance, and as they have the right to politically, they can change the law, and they can make it toothless. So we have to find a balance that gives them enough power to check the corruption of the sitting government, enough independence, but not so much that they can stop the government on day one. Getting this balance right is very difficult because I can assure you, whoever is elected in India, in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, in Nepal, in Sri Lanka, from the Prime Minister to the peon, if you really investigate them, they have all done some corruption. You will not find a single person in politics, in business, in the bureaucracy, in any of our countries, who you can say, I will investigate them fully and I will not find anything. Is there such a person? Is such a person in this room? Even if you don't want to, you will have paid a bribe for something. Even if you didn't want to. Right? So, I can say it without any doubt that all of us, whether willingly or unwillingly, have paid a bribe somewhere for something. Okay. If that is the case, if you have a truly independent anti-corruption commission, they can bring down any government on day one. Now, this is not workable. So we have to find a workable solution that they have enough power to prevent them from doing the mega corruption, from bank looting, from capital flight, from illicit financial flows, but not enough power that they can stop the government on day one. Now, this is not a balance that is easy, and we will not get it right. Reform is an ongoing process, right? But to just say we will just give them any power, full power, I can assure you, day one of the politically elected government, they will tear up this ordinance and throw it away because they will not be able to operate. So we are facing this challenge. If you have any ideas, let me know. We are on that commission. We are discussing this very actively. Thank you.
Thank you so much, panelists. One pressing question from you.
Thank you very much. Question is, what message we shall be taking from here after this meeting? That, as you have very correctly said, Bangladesh could be an example. We're sitting with the general here, who was army general here. The army, the bureaucracy, the judiciary, none could stop the system of corruption that has happened and we have witnessed in this part of the world. That was, I think, the state has failed, at least by the institutions. Why it is surviving? Because of the ordinary people's ignorance and their contributions from home and abroad. About 15 million people are contributing every day their salary to the country, and the ordinary people are working, but they are ignorant, about the statehood, the crime of the, the depth of criminalism that we have witnessed, that the flight of capital to the tune of billions from a country like Bangladesh. So Bangladesh is ahead in corruption in the whole subcontinent. I think a friend from Pakistan, Mr. Fayaz, was telling that the system, for example, in Bangladesh, newly created highway police, Mr. Mustaq, is not working. I'm almost every week I go to Kumilla. I don't see any police anywhere. If there is a jam, why it is jam? Nobody can answer. Why are we going to complain? Nobody is answering. But Pakistan, for example, they have demonstrated that the system can deliver. In Japan, the system is working. See, no corruption at least in the ordinary level. Maybe some corruption at the oligarch or big level for business, etc. But in the our country's ordinary people are very, very good. But unfortunately, the political system, the administrative system, the bureaucracy, even I'm talking in front of a general, that they could not safeguard the flight of capital that was the costing of the sovereignty of the country. What the hell of sovereignty is there that you are holding an army they cannot guard? Why should I have an army like this? Why should I have a bureaucracy like this? Why should we have a judiciary like this? Therefore, people are revolted. They have taken, on the 5th of August, they have defied everything. Unfortunately, there was no revolutionary party. There was no revolutionary party like Taliban's. There could have been millions of people could have been slaughtered because of their criminal acts. Bangladesh people are very good. But unfortunately, we are not giving a correct governance, And I think this is time that we're working with the reforms and we're talking about all the reforms. Let's set example that after shedding of so much of blood in the South Asian country like Bangladesh, what economists termed as a Bangladesh begins again. And I, at this age, 73, running business, a self-made man, would like to see Bangladesh is really beginning with the new regime, new thoughts, new ideas, new governance, and new generation. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, sir. Who wants to handle our comments? Anyone?
I'll just start because I think you made a very pertinent point about, there are institutions, executive, legislature, judiciary, army, which have their prescribed, constitutional roles and duties, But in countries like ours, the point that I was making initially is that, these institutions don't function as they should. Because of the inherent nature of politics, seeping into roles of every country, every institution. For instance, you see political class or the executive body in our country, legislature and executive is so strong that it impacts on the appointment of the judiciaries. It impacts on the appointment of constitutional bodies. It impacts on the functioning of bureaucracy. What would the bureaucrat, an honest bureaucrat, do when his political boss directs him and interferes into his day-to-day duties? Role of executive is just to give an order. How that duty is executed is according to the code of conduct, according to the roles prescribed TOR of a bureaucracy. But when bureaucracy's role is tampered upon, that's when things begin to go wrong. And we've already said what inspires or what influences politicians to tamper with their roles. It's because of their interest. Right, so accumulation. They need accumulation to, fund and proceed their political future. And it's same with the judicial appointment. It's same with the other constitutional appointment like anti-corruption bodies. How will an anti-corruption chief function independently when he has been lobbying from political parties to get his appointment right? So, even when he functions, he just cherry picks, cases which are like Professor Mustaq Khan was saying, which are targeting the opposition parties and not the ruling parties. So that's the thing.
Thank you. Faiz, do you want to respond quickly?
Just one thing very quickly. I think we are going overboard with the empowerment of anti-corruption, commissions. I can share one example from Pakistan is that at one point, the National Accountability Bureau became so intrusive into every department that bureaucracy simply refused to sign on any paper. They thought because exactly that also renders you sort of ineffective. Same in Nepal probably, and not sure what's the case in Bangladesh. So you as Professor Mushtaq has said, you have to strike a right balance, where they have the liberty, they have the freedom, but also under a check, which is also sort of built on credibility. Thank you so much.
I think your point is absolutely right. This is an opportunity and we have to get it right. But I would just say one thing, don't expect reform to be based simply on new laws. Reform to be effective requires the empowerment of society, empowerment of businesses, empowerment of political activists and new organizations, but also citizens. So the rules are not enforced just from above. Rules are enforced by the horizontal action of individuals all the time. Just to give you an example, you ask yourself, why does anyone stand in a line waiting for a bus? Is it because they are scared of the police or the CCTV camera? And in Dhaka, you will find that if you're in Gulshan waiting for Dhaka Chaka, people are standing in line. But if you are in some outskirts or in some Mufassal town, people are not standing in line. And you ask yourself, why? Is this cultural? No. Because it's the same people. The same person who is standing in line in Eastern Bank Limited will not be standing in line in Janata Bank. Why is this? It is to do with the distribution of power. So if I am standing in a line where if I break the line, someone from below will grab me back and say, Bhai, ekhane serial ase. Means there is a line here. And I will look at the people in the line and I will immediately judge, I cannot break this line. Because the distribution of power is such, I will not break this line. If I am the same person in another person and people are not well dressed and powerful people are breaking up, and no one is pulling them back, I will say, if I don't get in front, I will never get on the bus. Because these people are already breaking, no one is stopping them. If I don't push, I will not get on the bus. This is how corruption starts. So and here is what happens when you have the police and the CCTV cameras. If you have the Gulshan line broken and the police comes, everyone will say this chap did it. And the police will have no option, however powerful that person is, to take action because other powerful people are pointing to this person. And anyone on the Gulshan line, even the driver, is the driver of a powerful person. It cannot be ignored. So in Gulshan, the police cannot ignore the public. And they will, generally speaking, pick up the right person. But if the same police come to another line somewhere in the outskirts, where the powerful have broken the line, and the people who are behind are not powerful, what will the same police do? Even with the CCTV camera, they will wipe out the CCTV camera, they will pick up some of the less powerful people, and they will take them away and say, you have disturbed the peace. The same police. They are behaving in one way here and a completely different way there. So you cannot just write more rules for the police and more incentives for the police without working on the distribution of power in the line. So this is why I'm saying, do not forget that corruption is also a feature of the distribution of power. Who are your businesses? Why are the businesses not shouting? Why is that, 3 or 4 businessmen looted the banks and all the other businesses stayed quiet? Because if they opened their mouth, they would be destroyed. So we have to make them more powerful. Because their businesses have been destroyed, they were not getting loans. Look, I have always been saying this for the last 15 years. On election day, if 10 million people came out on the streets and just stood there and saying, we will ensure that the election happens, what would have happened? People were scared. And why did July, August work? Because suddenly people were not scared. When people are not scared, even that power doesn't work. I think that what the lesson for this is that we should not be scared. No, when you see that a bank is being looted, you might be a small businessman. You start shouting. It might not work the first time, the second time, the third time, it will work. But if you don't shout, if the businesses and politicians and so on are not shouting, then power becomes absolute power. And absolute power will destroy the country. So this is why I'm saying, yes, we have to have laws and reforms, but we also have to empower ourselves and we have to not be scared. Thank you.
Thank you so much. With that, I think the two lessons I think I want to highlight in 1 minute. One is, of course, the corruption definition. You know this, right? There is a monopoly, high discretionary, and lack of accountability, then corruption will increase. So any corruption formula, if we just handle these three issues together and think about what are the check and balance over the functioning of this kind of government, then I think we can handle this. But this is not the one way of working. There are multiple ways of working that, and that is why we said that it's not only anti-corruption commission itself. All the people has to work on it, and we have to raise our voice. So with that in mind, thank you so much for joining. Hope that we'll find the next event more fruitful. Thank you.